Good afternoon. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the second day of the 9th Annual Wisconsin Science Festival. My name is Laura Heisler. I'm the co-founder and director of the festival, and we are delighted to see you here. This is the second of two, what we call sort of mini symposia to engage the campus in weighty topics around all things science. Yesterday, we had a really vibrant conversation on who owns science and what are the cultural norms in science. And I'm equally excited about today's conversation about the role that arts and entertainment play in making people aware of and understanding what science is all about. And so that's going to be, we're going to have a really interesting exploration. We have an amazing lineup of people. Really thrilled about that. But before I turn things over to our moderator, who is someone our campus community knows well, I just want to plug a couple of events. Something taking place this evening. We're going to get outside of this building. I should mention the festival is taking place right now in 90 communities across Wisconsin. There are more than 330 events. So if you know people around the state that aren't in Madison, you can let them know to go to wisconsinsciencefest.org, plug in their location, and they'll find something to do too, and then you guys can talk about that. This evening, if you want to find yourself, I'll thank the sponsors in a second. You know what? I should have more slides here. Well, I will thank the sponsors. I will mention this evening we are taking the festival downtown, so we will be all around the Capitol Square and State Street with about 36 different events. So you can check out stargazing and talk to astronomers on the rooftop at Parthenon. You can pop into Kilwin's and hear a lecture about chocolate. You can go to Fromagination and learn all about the science of cheese and many more things. And so again, if you go to wisconsinsciencefest.org, you will see all of those events. And if you just wander down State Street or to the Capitol, you can pick up information and pop into multiple different venues. And you can, if you don't feel like walking much, you can hop on the science trivia trolley around the square, do some fun science trivia, then hop off and go to another event. So I hope you take advantage of that opportunity. Tomorrow evening, the festival will come to a conclusion in this building at 8 o'clock with Kyle Hill, who is the author of a really popular blog called Because Science. He's also very involved in Mythbusters and the Discovery Channel, talking all about the science of Star Wars. So that's tomorrow night at 8 o'clock in this room. I think that's going to be popular, so if you want to come, I would say get here early. And then I do want to make sure to thank all of the sponsors that make the Science Festival possible. You can see them here. I'll mention that Promega is the sponsor of this evening's event, as well as Kyle Hill's visit, and we're really thrilled that they share that interest in engaging with the community around science as much as we do. So with that, I would like to introduce Joe Handelsman, who is the director of the Wisconsin Institute for Discovery, who has been bringing the conversation about science and arts and entertainment to our community, and we'll say more about today's panel.
Thanks, Laura, and thank you for all your work organizing the Wisconsin Science Festival, which has become nationally famous for being a superb science festival. So I think we're very lucky to have Laura Heisler here organizing it. I just wanted to introduce the panel to talk a little bit about where interest in this topic of the fusion of entertainment and science has originated. For me, it was really through my commitment and involvement in diversity in science. We need more scientists. There's currently a shortage of bachelor's level scientists. Despite the debate about whether we have too many or too few PhDs, there's no question that we have a shortage at the bachelor's level, and we're not attracting kids to science at the rate that we need to. And so part of that is, as our country diversifies, we also need to be focusing on the diversity of scientists. We have more and more diverse kids in our schools, and we're excluding a larger percentage of our children from science by making science look like the domain of white people or men or any other dominant part of our culture. I started working on diversity in the White House when I was a science advisor to President Obama. And STEM diversity was a very deep commitment of the presidents and also the first ladies. And we worked on diversity from many different angles, and it became absolutely clear that we absolutely must diversify science. From so many perspectives, that is a must. There's, of course, an equity issue, a fairness issue. Science is a really great career, and yet we only reserve that career, it seems, for people who look a certain way, and that's just not right and not fair. But we also need the numbers and the diversity of perspectives that diverse people bring. There's copious research showing that diversity in any group and diversity of pretty much any kind, whether it's age and experience or ethnicity or training or nationality, will bring more creative and defensible solutions out of any given group. And that research, I think, should tell us that we're not doing as good science as we could by not having a diverse scientific community. And President Obama was quite passionate about that subject. We're also wasting talent. There are great scientists embedded in communities that don't identify with science. And there's no question that there are some budding scientists who will be turned off from science because of who they see or who they don't see in the scientific community. And so we're losing real greatness in African American students, Hispanic students, Native American students, disabled students, and many other groups that are underrepresented in science. So while I was in the White House, President Obama and our team became very interested in the use of entertainment, because it's evident that young girls in particular turn away from science, despite the fact that they do as well as boys in science in school, when they hit about middle school. And that's a very interesting phenomenon. So what happens in middle school, and there are some hypotheses about that, and we may hear about that some more later from our panel. But it's clear that the images that middle school girls are seeing of scientists are not the people that they want to be when they grow up. They're frequently, most often, not women, and they're not people of color. And frankly, even the white men aren't all that interesting. They're pretty unpleasant, and they may be fun to laugh at or be the subject of entertainment, but they're not the people that you aspire to be, especially if you're a cool teenage kid who wants to remain cool. And so we talked quite extensively about how to make the image of science different so that more kids will want to be scientists and will identify with the people that they see on the screen, both small and large, in science. And that's when we developed our Image of Science, or Image of STEM initiative, which was a very big part of the last 3 years of the Obama administration in the science division where I worked. And one of the most striking experiences I had was attending and speaking at the Bentonville Film Festival in Arkansas. And there were 300 screenwriters in the room. And I said at some point that, you collectively have had a tremendous impact on social norms. And I cited several examples, like the introduction of the concept of the designated driver, or discussions of teen pregnancy. There are all these social movements that have been effected by TV and film scripts. And it was almost like you could see these writers sit up a little straighter in their chairs and kind of feel really proud. And afterwards, several of them came up to me and said, I had no idea that we did anything besides entertainment. It had just never occurred to them that they had a role to play in terms of making social change. And so that's when I became even more passionate about the idea of bringing science to script writers and writers of all types, so that hopefully they can incorporate science more naturally into their material. And you'll be hearing about some of our initiatives here at the Wisconsin Institute for Discovery to try to do that. I also just wanted to mention that if you haven't seen our mural on diversity in science, it's about 100 feet that way. It's just being finished by a really world-famous muralist, Melanie Stimmel. She'll be done by the end of today, so it's been quite a process to see that being unfolded during the week. And so I urge you on your way out to go see that. So with that introduction, that's kind of the origin and interest of this panel. I wanted to start with introducing Ginger Ann Contreras, who is going to be our first presenter. Ginger is the director of the Science to Street Art program at the University of Wisconsin, Wisconsin Institute for Discovery, and she's the executive director of our Wisconsin Institute for Discovery Outreach Arm, which is the Illuminating Discovery Hub. So with no further ado, I introduce you to Ginger.
Thank you, Joe. Feel very honored and lucky to work with her every day. I'm going to talk a little bit about our programs. There we go. So what I'm looking at, I'm so excited about this panel because a unique little bit about my history is that I got my undergraduate degree here. My background is in bioarchaeology, so I studied ancient remains and disease. But I also was in the theater department and in the art department. I trained as a stage performer. So merging the two fields, science and art, has always been a part of my passion. And I always talk about, for me, I didn't start excelling in my sciences until I was applying my art background, how I visualized the world to understand the science concepts. So for what I do here, for the Illuminating Discovery Hub, is I look at how are we transforming the story of science so that we're including community that have not been engaged or utilized within STEM fields. So some of the programs we're working on is Science to Street Art. That's where we're pairing scientists with street artists to create murals throughout the city of Madison, one being in this building, and we highly recommend you see it. It's also going to have 3D aspects. We also are working on Science to Script, which is about putting science to story, to the page, to the stage. How are we communicating different science concepts within entertainment? Because for a lot of people, if you don't have a person in your family or your community that is in a STEM field, you're getting introduced to it from entertainment. So what is the messaging entertainment is telling you about that field and the people that succeed in it? That's a really big part of what we're doing here. And I'm going the wrong way here. So Science to Street Art, just a little bit more about it. We're looking at new approaches to STEM accessibility. Our goal in the coming years is to create augmented and virtual reality within these murals so that we can add to informal learning activities about the science concepts. We're going to have 5 murals going up throughout the city of Madison for that, and I'm listing those locations right here and the themes of them. So if you're from the Madison area, I highly recommend you check them out. There's going to be a couple going up this weekend. In particular, the periodic table mural. That one's going to be going up starting on Sunday over at the Meadowwood Shopping Center, which is in the Meadow Ridge neighborhood. We're really excited about these murals because we partnered with the city of Madison. So one really important part of these murals is that they're going to be up for a minimum of 10 years. So the amount of impact they're going to have is going to be pretty incredible. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about Science to Script, but I'm going to save it for one of our other panelists and the exciting work they're doing that's inspired some of the data I put on here. So Science to Script is looking at how are we pairing scientists with storytellers to create more science accuracy within story, as well as who the characters are that they're depicting within those science stories. So a little bit like method acting, and method acting is when an actor goes and lives the life. They really put themselves in the shoes of the character they're going to be playing in order to shape the character, so they live it. So having writers go and have residencies within labs, talk to scientists about the science concepts and themes that they want in their story will be really important to how we're looking at how we're telling the story of science to larger audiences that are going to theaters, stage, reading a novel. So this is a big part of our program. And I'll just put up a point about this that I think is so important, is the Gina Davis Institute did some research, and they've done some amazing research looking at films. They did one that was a study of films out of 10 years of films, gross selling films that were related to science. And what they found is that 27.9% of STEM characters were people of color. And this was really important to me because when they broke it down, me identifying as Latinx culture, less than 4% of those characters were Latinx people playing scientists. What is that saying about who can be a scientist and who's going to succeed at it? And so part of what I'm really excited about for this panel is that we're really looking at the future of STEM advancement, and it really rests on the responsibility of diversifying the future of STEM, as Joe has mentioned. So we're really looking at how are we creating powerful messaging, fusing the science and the arts, for leveraging both scholarships and creating people that are feeling grounded and able to bloom and blossom and give back to community, feeling that their voices are heard and they're able to use their culture to do that. Thank you.
Hello, I'm David Lynn. I'm a practicing scientist at Emory University, where I work in the departments of chemistry and biology. And my field of study is in systems chemistry, where I try to look at diverse populations of molecules and the emergence of order from those molecules, and trying to understand physically and chemically how those processes operate. Turns out the same processes happen today as you walked around the science festival, where you see children looking at things and emerging new opportunities and changing the way they think about science or they think about themselves and who they are. So this concept of emergent properties is quite general, from the molecular level to the human society level to the universe that we live in. So it's a general thing. I am a scientist. I'm an experimentalist largely, and I wanted to give you sort of a timeline of some of the experiments that we've done to think about this concept of using the arts to help us understand scientific principles. I moved from the University of Chicago to Emory in 2000, and one of the first experiments we did thinking about the order around us was introduce a new class that we call order. In this case, it stood for On Recent Discoveries by Emory Researchers. And what it was is a freshman class that I recruited graduate students in STEM disciplines to teach their scholarship to entering freshmen, based on the principle that freshmen come in naive about what they want to do, and to be able to interact with STEM graduate students who have succeeded, who are succeeding in the sciences, would be a good role model for them to understand and grow from. And so how do I assess the success of that? It's hard to know how do we assess the successes of any of these things, but in this case, it was so popular that all the other disciplines at the university wanted to be a part of it. So we had graduate students from English and history and political science and business who all wanted to teach in this program. So it ended up with a class where you would have 5 different, what we call teacher scholars, 5 different graduate students who were talking about the scholarship that could come from history or religion or English or physics or math. And they had to come up with a course that tied all those themes together to teach a class to the entering freshmen. So the graduate students loved it. It was very empowering for them because they were talking about their scholarship. It was very empowering for the undergraduates, for the freshmen, because they got to see now the whole breadth of an academic institution rather than just in the sciences. And it allowed us to teach, fundamental things like the scientific method. How do we know what we know and how do we assess that? So that turned out to be successful on those levels, at least. The benefit of a curriculum in a college is you have freshmen come in and you see over the 4 years what they choose to do. So you can ask whether or not you've changed their mind, made them think about things in a different way and learn something, and proceeded according to their own unique capabilities and principles. The second experiment I'll talk about is sort of came from the order class, but it took advantage of Darwin's birthday. And we call this evolution revolution, and it was sort of thinking about where do we go from my understanding of evolution now. In the context of order, the kinds of things that I study, the biological world is really driven by this concept of evolution. So something that was near and dear to my heart. But what we did with this is, also diversified it in the context of inviting artists to come and go through the symposium that we had and listen to the talks. And then we gave them 6 months to go away and come back with their perceptions, their responses to the Evolution Revolution event. So we had dancers and fine artists and playwrights who came and experienced what we were talking about, the future of evolution. Where do we go with our understanding of evolution from this point? Respond to that. So that was interesting, a little hard to assess, right? It's not clear whether they changed the way people thought about science because it was sort of a one-time thing. But the events that were popular, the people came and they listened, and they went home, and it was hard to really know whether or not what they learned from it. And this is sort of typical of science events for the public. It's sort of hard in a classroom, in a curriculum, you can follow that. In the public, it's a little more difficult. So the issues of how successful are science festivals is a question that I think it'd be good for us to discuss. We did start also from the chemistry department at Emory. We started the Atlanta Science Festival a few years after it started here. And it's been going for 6 years now. It has continued to grow. It started as a week, and now it spans over 3 weeks. We have 50,000 people that show up for this every year. We have a big expo day at the end, and we have universities, all the universities in Atlanta participate in this, and the students put on events. So it's very much like what happens here. A lovely process. The people who do it have great fun. Are we making a difference, and how do we know whether we're making a difference? So that's another example of this that I think it'd be good for us to sort of consider and think about. The last one that I want to talk about is one that, well, actually two others. One that Ginger sort of started is this thing we call 4x48, and 4x48, very descriptive title. But what happened for the last 2 years in the summer is 4 scientists meet to have lunch with 4 national playwrights. And there's usually a theme. And the first theme that we had was we would all read the novel Frankenstein. The novel is one of the most read novels in the United States. It was written by a 16-year-old woman, basically about synthetic biology. So it touches on a lot of the themes that are relevant to what we're thinking about today. And the lunch was around, what was the science that was going on at the time? How did that influence Mary Shelley, the author? And how has the science changed? And what is the science that's happening now? So at the end of lunch, the 4 playwrights had 48 hours to write a full-length play. And I looked at them and I said, oh, God, how could you possibly do that? And they said, well, as I understand it, you in the wintertime, you go to Hawaii and you lock yourself up in a dark room and look at slides all day long. So different people have different ways of torturing themselves in the context of ideation. So this is what the playwrights did. So they turned in their plays on Wednesday, and they turned them into 4 actors. That was one of the stipulations. They had to write their plays to be for 4 actors. And frankly, I thought the actors had the hardest time. They had to read the plays cold to the scientists and the playwrights, which I could never do, but they did a marvelous job of that. And then they have 48 hours to work with the director to fine-tune the readings and then to read them for the public that weekend. So it's sort of 4x4x48x48. 4x48 is the title. And that turns out we've manifested this in several ways. For example, those plays get read in the Atlanta Science Festival in March, which we've done for the last 2 years. The last one we did was Ed Young's book on I Contain Multitudes, which is about the human microbiome. In that context, we couldn't have Mary Shelley come, but we had Ed Young come and speak at the Science Festival about the process of his book and writing his book, and he got to experience the plays that came out of his book. So it's a very nice, synergistic, mutually beneficial thing. The scientists sit there and argue about the science that happened, and out of those processes, new projects emerge and new ideas come out. The playwrights sort of struggle with this, and theater emerges. And the last thing I want to talk about is something that I missed that came out of the evolution revolution, and that's a flash mob that we developed called group intelligence. And the flash mob, again, in terms of assessment, the flash mob was about order. And it started with a podcast that people would sign up for doing this. They'd take the podcast and they'd go to a park in Atlanta, and they would get instructions. And the instructions were about tasks they had to do as a group. And so one of the tasks was, for example, they were told on their podcast, walking around this park, ordering in different ways, they were told, okay, at the sound of the tone, you will start singing a song, any song, whatever song. And 4 minutes, your charge is to listen to the other songs that are being sung. And within 4 minutes, everyone needs to be singing the same song. It represents this concept of emergence, this concept of evolution in a very real human sort of way. So it's a nice sort of demonstration of a principle. It's evolution. It's difficult to understand, but it's one that you can understand directly. The other tasks that they had were really, in the context of evolution, highlighting diversity. So the tasks that they had required, for example, in some cases, you need children to be able to get things out of a cubbyhole that the adults' hands couldn't reach. You had other tasks where you had to get things high on a shelf, and you had to do things cooperatively. So the concept of group intelligence was highlighting the importance of diversity in evolution rather than just the concept of selection of the fittest. So it's a different sort of way of contextualizing this in the life that we live every day in the context of the importance of diversity. So again, those last ones, I bring up that last one at the very end because it's fun. The people love doing it. How do we know that we've changed the minds of the people that have done this? And we don't have to change them so that they become scientists. I think that's not the goal. The goal is to change them in such a way that they can capture their own unique curiosity and creativity in whatever they decide to do. But we want them to think about that in the context of exposure to these different processes and take advantage of those for their own needs. So, thank you.
Hi, my name is Michael Graf, and I am executive producer of a production company called Spot Film Works. I am also a screenwriter and director. I'm a working member of the Directors Guild of America, and I'm a produced screenwriter. And I am not a scientist, so I just want to make that clear right from the very beginning. But what really attracted me to this event and to what this group is trying to do it's very parallel to something that's been really dear to my heart. And years ago, I came and I met a gentleman named Gordon McKenzie, and Gordon was the founder of Shoebox Greeting Cards. He was a sculptor. He was an artist, and he used to travel around to schools throughout the country, and from elementary schools to college, and he would talk. He'd present his art. He'd talk about art, and he made a really interesting observation. He said when he'd go into elementary schools, he'd go into kindergarten classes and first grade classes, and it didn't matter if they were poor schools, if they were middle class schools, if they were wealthy schools, rural or urban. He said the thing that really struck him is that on all of the walls and on the windows, there was artwork. And he'd ask the same question wherever he went. He'd ask the kids, how many of you are artists? And enthusiastically, every kid in kindergarten first class raises their hand and says, I'm an artist, I'm an artist. And he noticed that as he went and made the same presentation to kids in 4th, 5th, 6th grade, he'd ask the same question. There'd be less artwork on the walls. And he'd ask the same question, how many kids in here are artists? Some hands would go up, not as many as in kindergarten or first grade. And by middle school, junior high school, hardly any art on the walls at all. And when he'd ask that question, a couple of kids in the back of the room would look around and then sheepishly raise their hand and not even verbally communicate. And his concern was that as a society and as educators and as parents and community members, that we are prohibiting a natural element of being human, of our humanness, that's being creative. And I saw a lot of similarities when I heard Joe talk about how kids excel in math, but until they get to junior high school, middle school, that tends to level off. So I think there's some similarities that can be learned from both the arts and the sciences. And one of the things, and I'm asked on a weekly basis, it's so exciting what you do. You're a writer, you're a director, and it's almost inevitably followed up with, I wish I could do that. I wish I was creative. And I think that's a real problem, because I think I like to tell, when I work with actors and people that are non-actors that are performing, creativity is like a muscle. It needs to be used, it needs to be exercised, and it needs to be trained. And it's not that people don't have it, it's just that they've let that skill set atrophy. So I am very attracted to this idea of cross-pollinating the arts and sciences, and encouraging people at a younger age to get involved. And I think if we can do that, and kind of recognizing what the issues and problems are, and attacking the problem at a real elementary, younger age, we can make a difference. So that's kind of what attracted me to this group. So thank you.
Hello, I'm Carrie Hanson. Hold on a second. I'm the artistic director of the Seldums. We are a Chicago-based dance company, and we've been around for about 18 years. So I'm a choreographer, and I used to be a performer. And more recently, I've been stepping back into the role of a director and a producer and a choreographer. The process is very collaborative. The work that we've been doing about the last 8 years has kind of taken a shift towards more dance theater work. And I think that corresponded with a shift in my own interest. I felt like I had to sort of combine my interest in this artistic platform with my own interests as a citizen and as a mom. And so I started making pieces about, the first piece that we made was a work about landfills and trash and our practices of consumption. More recently, we've been working on a piece about climate change, and I'm going to show you just a little bit about of that in a moment. I was interested that, Joe, you started out talking about how science has this sort of problem of needing to figure out how to be more entertaining, and I kind of work from the opposite standpoint, which is where I need to convince people that dance can do something beyond just entertain. And so we work really hard to, and I'm not just using dance, I am using script and visual design and sometimes projection and sound design to all of these different sorts of delivery systems to get across the message of the content, whether it's climate change or whether it's about economic recession. So we're coming at it from a number of different ways, but I always insist that we lodge the content, that we express the content in the body. So I'm going to have you do something with me. Are you game? Okay. So one of the ways that we started Exit Disclaimer, that was our 2012 piece about climate change, was I started just thinking about green technology and about that process of innovation. Like science is really based on having the first version of it, and then studying that. It's about study and examination and about testing. And then the next person comes along and improves on it. So can you all just I'll do exactly what we did with the dancers. So can you just take an arm, since you're seated, just take an arm and don't follow my gesture. Create your own gesture. Just make a shape. Make a shape. Okay. This is awesome. I should have a picture of this. So you've got your shape. Now do that one more time, but as you get there, I want you to think about feeling it. Feel it. Feel the sensation of that. Concentrate on the sensation of it. Okay. And now I'm going to ask you to perform it in a different way. Instead of feeling it or sensing it, I want you to study it. Yeah? So largely that's about your focus and about your attention and about your interest in that thing. right? So for example, can you hear me? Yeah, okay. So if I'm here, I can either feel it, and I'm feeling my back, and I'm feeling the reach, or I can have it out there, and I'm examining everything about that, maybe from different viewpoints, right? And so the game that we played was that the first dancer would lead with a simple gesture, and the next person would come along and they would look at it and then they would slightly tweak it. They're just going to make an improvement on it, and so forth and so on. And from there, we started, I get really interested in the sort of complexity of choreography. And so we just kept figuring out different ways to sort of modulate and like take it backwards and forwards, retrograde, combine an upper body with a lower body, and building in that way that I think mirrors a little bit of the way that science has its procedures of kind of building upon and building outward. So one other thing that we've been doing with Exit Disclaimer, which we're bringing back, and we're bringing it to Lathrop Hall in November, and then also Flow, which is also premiering here at Union Theater in January, another piece about climate change, is we're working with this idea of a sort of anti-science position, or a sort of scientific illiteracy. And we're coming at that from a few different standpoints, and you'll see that here. I'm not a PC person. How do I do this? Sorry.
The Earth is flat.
No. Yes. The Earth is flat. Then how do you explain just how?
I hate that. I hate when people are like, how do you explain blah, blah, blah? Because the shoe
It should be on the other foot.
It should be on them. The shoe should be on them to say how they explain whatever it is they need to explain.
Okay.
The horizon, or whatever.
Then how do you explain the horizon or whatever?
Oh my God, you sound like a baby. The horizon is just a line in the sky. The sky is a glass dome over the earth.
Math and physics are fake.
Yes, exactly.
The sun is a spotlight. It shines on one part of the Earth at a time. That's day and night.
Okay,
You've convinced me. The Earth is flat.
yes, it is.
Then how do you explain that? Oh my God, shut up! The Earth is flat. It's a disc, and the North Pole is at the center.
Antarctica is a wall around the outside.
How do you explain etheric wind? By using flat Earth, I can predict things like eclipse, sunrise, and days of the planets. Don't you understand? Don't you know the so-called GPS are airplanes? And we can see their chemtrails in straight lines?
Holy shit. Did you just use GPS to prove the Earth is flat?
Yes. There are no GPS in space.
When you release a helium balloon, the government shoots it down.
Oh. Oh my God.
You just got flattened. Flat, flat.
Boom! Now you see? That's a flat slap. The Earth is not warming. It's cooling. If anything, it's staying the same. It's a conspiracy. Climate, whatever. I believe human potential is infinite. The price of oil is manipulated to keep us housed. There is no so-called limit. If anything, it's cooling in certain places. The Earth is not. I just can't argue anymore with these people who... My cousin keeps telling me not to watch on YouTube those... When I'm driving, I'm listening to... It's just not real. I can see the snow, white reflecting. It's cold. My kid makes a snow angel. That's real. The Earth is not. I just can't argue with these people anymore.
Yeah, so in the first clip that you saw with the school desk, we use that old-fashioned school desk throughout the piece, and people are tipping it, as you saw, and using it in every conceivable way, except for the way that a school desk is intended to be used. When we get to flow, I thought that an interesting way for us to talk about climate change denialism would be to go in through the side door, and that's why we brought in the flat earther movement. And I think that that's one of the things that we can do is we can sort of set up this absurdity, right, on stage, and it's easy to see the absurdity of that, and then to transfer it, then to link it directly to the Earth is not warming, that resistance, that sort of conspiracy thinking as well. That performance was actually situated in the Rothko Chapel in Houston, Texas. We did a research residency down in Houston where we interviewed Harvey rescuers, civilian rescuers, flood victims, a woman who is a geologist and now a climate activist. And I think one of the things that we're doing with this piece, with Flow, is we're bumping up denialism, examples of denialism, right next to examples of evidence. So, for example, what we would do next with this piece is then to hear the voice from some of those Houston interviews. Yeah, I think I've taken more than my time, so I'm going to exit and continue.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Kilpatrick, and I am not a scientist, nor do I play one on TV, but I've had the pleasure of working for the last 9 years with Gina Davis and her Institute on Gender and Media. And Gina started the Institute when she was watching television with her young daughter. It was kind of like, where are the girls, number one? If there are girls, where are their interesting roles? And she thought that maybe she was imagining this, so she personally commissioned a research study to evaluate family film, and she discovered that the ratio of boys to girls was the same as it had been since 1946, which is one woman or girl for every 4 men. So our approach, and that was 12 years ago, the Institute has grown significantly in depth since then, but our approach has always been to work from within the studio system and not to shame and blame, but to be a partner to the studios to educate them, because particularly we focus a lot on family content, and generally people are not intentionally doing a poor job of representing anything, gender, race, ability, but they may not be aware. So Gina would initially, when she was going to meetings with studios, she would say, have you realized that there's this big gender disparity program in children's content? And they'd be like, no, it's been fixed. Didn't you see Beauty and the Beast? And she'd be like, yeah, that character had Stockholm Syndrome. So I'm not totally sure that's showing that it's been fixed. So basically our approach as an organization has been very research-based, where we perform the research and then we meet collegially with studios and writers and content creators to make them aware of the data. And we've, well, I don't want to take up all the time either. I'll focus on STEM. But anyway, we've developed a lot of ways to do that. We do hand coding of content, but we also have a machine learning tool that evaluates content based on voice and facial recognition. And we were funded for that project through Google, and Megan Smith, who I'm sure Joe knows, who was the chief technology officer under Obama after she left Google. And that's where we first got interested in STEM with Megan and Joe. And for me personally, my career has always been in research. However, it's been on the creative, marketing, operational, sales side of it. But I've always worked in research organizations and am fascinated about it. And this particular program is one I am super passionate about. So we decided we need to look at how these characters are portrayed on film, because our theory of change is if she can see it, she can be it. So if girls can see these characters and and it's not just girls, if anyone can see these characters, it's going to make a difference in what they believe is possible. So we've partnered with the Lyda Hill Foundation out of Dallas over the last year to do a lot in this space. And I'm just going to show you a quick video. So in addition to doing research, now we're consulting on TV shows. The Lyda Hill Foundation is creating content. I'm going to show you a little blurb from 2 shows that are out right now. The first one is called Mission Unstoppable. It's on CBS on Saturday mornings, and it focuses on women in STEM. And there's another YouTube show that's called Fast Forward Girls. So I'm just going to show you a little clip that talks about that, if I can figure out how to do this. And I am a PC user, so. Oh, but it's not a touchscreen. And then very good.
Has a profound influence on our culture and on our children, which is why I started my research institute back in 2004.
For us, data and research has been the magic bullet because it allows people to make informed decisions versus emotions. When they hear the facts, they can really embrace it.
We know that if you show a little girl what women in STEM are accomplishing today, then that little girl will believe that she too can be a force for positive change.
So we're extremely proud of a new study that we conducted in partnership with 21st Century Fox, and we're calling it the Scully effect. Women who watch The X-Files regularly were 50% more likely to work in STEM fields.
What I find fantastic is any notion that there are answers beyond the realm of science.
Media is one of our most powerful tools to influence pop culture. And if we really want to eradicate unconscious bias, women have as much unconscious bias as men. It's really important that we use a gender lens when we're thinking about stories that we tell.
Nearly 2/3 of the women surveyed who work in STEM said Dana Scully served as a role model for them.
Is that because of the character of Scully, women and girls have been pursuing forensic science degrees for college
The
careers.
character of Dana Scully was a physics major and inspired me to major in physics and go through and get my PhD, and thank you.
There's something called the CSI effect to explain how so many more women have gone into the field of forensic science because of all the modeling they've had on TV.
Even if I love math in the first grade, I'm less likely to see it as a thing for girls by the second grade. But if she sees smart professional women using STEM in her favorite TV shows, YouTube channels, and films, then she's going to hang on to skills like math as she forms her STEM identity in third grade and beyond.
If I see women who look like me, taking things apart, constructing, and collaborating with others, then I can imagine a world where I could do anything.
Hey, it's Miranda Cosgrove. Do you have a passion for science?
Yes!
Join me every weekend on Mission Unstoppable to meet the next generation of pioneers.
This is incredible.
Guys, this is so crazy.
I'm Goldilocks, and you're watching Fast Forward Girls.
Each week, one girl will go on a surprise adventure of a lifetime. She'll meet two amazing women and take a walk in their shoes.
I'm Natasha Case. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Cool House Ice Cream.
How did you go from architecture to ice cream?
I'm a scientist here, and my job is to figure out what makes meat at the molecular level. All of the sensory attributes that you would ascribe to ground beef in particular, we try to figure that out here, and then using plants, try to create exact replicas of those things.
STEM is everywhere. And if girls see women in cool jobs in STEM, then they'll feel empowered to pursue STEM in their own lives.
Visit cjane.org for tools on creating interesting, authentic female characters in STEM.
Well, thank you for those 5 very compelling presentations on our topic. So and this is for anybody, what do you see as the biggest barriers to using entertainment and the arts for expanding the image of STEM?
So from my perspective, really with the people we work with, it's education. It's showing them, and that's one of the things we try to do is build toolkits for content creators, so they have examples. It's the events like Joe was talking about at Bentonville Film Festival and the 4x4x48, where you're bringing scientists together with writers and creators, so they realize they are real people with interesting stories. So for me, it's just about how are we getting the word out there and educating the people who are creating the content.
And I'm gonna.
There's actually a really interesting phenomenon going on in the entertainment industry right now, and within the last 2 years, really since Harvey Weinstein's been arrested, there's a new filter added to the review of screenplays, and that filter is whether or not the screenplay is sexist or not. And it's a really simple test that's applied to the screenplay. First, it looks, are there women with speaking roles featured in the screenplay? The second thing that they look for is, one, is there women? 2, is there dialogue with women? And 3, is the dialogue anything other than talk about a boyfriend or a husband? And I think that third element is really important, really crucial. But that is being applied all over the entertainment industry now, and it's really encouraging.
And just from a technology perspective, as it speaks, so that's actually called the Bechtel test. But from a technology perspective, Final Draft, which is a tool that scriptwriters use to prepare scripts, we worked in conjunction with them to develop sort of like a diversity screen. So you're looking at gender, race, what occupations people have, ethnicity, ability, sexual orientation. And our goal is to get this, and it's incorporated in the software, and our goal is to get a one sheet that can be printed out with the script, because studios are looking at diversity. It's hugely important to them right now, where they could have a sheet just to stick on top of their screenplay that says, okay, look, this is diverse, the characters are well represented, et cetera, so that they could do a quick check.
I'm going to quickly jump into one of the challenges I see is how do we get science accuracy within the films as well, because we do have some amazing films, but they're not portraying the science accurately. And that's a balance being both an artist and then someone that's in the science field. Is artists are, well, what about my creative liberty and the freedom too? So how do you balance those two? So that's some of the programming that David's worked with, our goal with our programming, because you do get as well, being a bioarchaeologist, I immediately had people go, oh, Indiana Jones, right? That is not bioarchaeology. and I mean, this is a valid point just in terms of bioarchaeology as well, because people would go into the field, and this is why they recommend specifically with this field that you have field experience before you go into your grad programs, because people would see those films and they'd want to do it, but then they'd realize after they already had their graduate degrees that they hated the field work. It actually wasn't something they liked. It was not an Indiana Jones experience. So that's where the accuracy becomes really important to help with still marrying it with where can you be creative. So certain things with sci-fi, there's some things that you can have based in science, and then you can go a little beyond too.
I'll just follow up on what Ginger said and what Michael said, actually. One of the limitations is not only do we not teach scientists to be communicators to the general public, we don't reward scientists for doing that. So there's no reward structure for that. And so it's like are you an actor going, well, you see the same thing with science, right? You know, can you communicate that science, or are you able to talk about the science in a general way? And so we don't do that with scientists, and that's a limitation. There's another limitation, however, too, and that is sort of some of the things that we've seen. The artist can go in and explain the science to a community, and then they leave. And that's also a limitation. You know, so what's the follow-up that we have? I mean, a film is nice. You can play a film over and over again. A dance is lovely. You can do it over and over again. How do you know that you've made an impact? You've exposed them to it. Have you changed their mind? And how do you assess that in some way? And I think that's a challenge that we have.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to. Is this on? I just wanted to follow up on that, and I think that it's what I feel right now with the premiere of this piece about climate change is that what we have a problem of is it's a problem of reach, and moving beyond our traditional audiences. The audiences that are going to see a dance concert are people that enjoy dance. They're less likely to be coming because they're interested in the topic of climate change. Right? And so, you know, and this also just goes back to how siloed all of these practices are. You know, in a university setting, and even in you know, elementary through upper level, everything is separated from the very outset, and so. There's nothing like proximity to create collaborative practices, right? And so if the Nelson Institute, for example, had a resident choreographer, sign me up, right? But you have to be, I think you have to be in the room to be both getting the information accurately, but also like building that together earlier in the game.
It has to be persistent.
Yes, right.
Yeah, and just from an entertainment perspective, one of the things that we're doing with Lyda Hill is really going after the places that girls are. I mean, it's like an example that Miranda Cosgrove is the host for this show. So that's someone who has a huge following. They did a Project Runway episode that they sponsored where it was the designers make the outfits, but there was also a coder there who created the outfits for a video game character. They're speaking at Teen Vogue. I mean, we're trying to really give this sort of a broader access from our perspective in terms of reach to girls.
So what's your creative process, for those of you who've done this, of taking a scientific idea and making it into compelling entertainment?
Well, I think the first thing you have to do when you're looking at taking compelling science and turning it into compelling entertainment, you have to step back and you need to ask what makes compelling entertainment. And because it's a totally different beast than it is, it's something very foreign if you come out of the sciences. Samuel Goldwyn famously said, "I want a story that starts with an earthquake and builds up to a climax." So, so pretty much all entertainment, if you look at entertainment, pretty much all entertainment, I coming from a film background, so when I refer to entertainment, I'm referring to film, television, that kind of thing. But pretty much all entertainment can be broken down into two groups, two basic genres. You've got drama and comedy. And what is drama? Drama, the simplest definition is that drama is conflict. Comedy is nothing more than exaggerated drama, conflict in the absurd. So, and within these two groups, there's subgenres, subgroups. You've got courtroom dramas, coming of age dramas, sports dramas, romantic comedies, black comedies. And it's the thing that all of these genres of stories have in common is that they are all stories that feature conflict. So when screenwriting, the great Aaron Sorkin likes to use the phrase intention and obstacle. Every good story is about a protagonist's quest or intention to get from point A to point B. But first must overcome an obstacle the writer creates for that protagonist to get to his destination. So if you use Star Wars as an example, the intention of Luke is to get off the farm, to seek adventure, to rescue a princess. The intention of Han Solo is to pay back the money he owes Jabba the Hutt. The intention of the droids is to deliver the plans to the Death Star to Obi-Wan Kenobi. The intention of Darth Vader is to crush the rebellion. So by putting all these different characters together, you can see the inherent obstacles that each pose for each other and that each must work to overcome. So the trick to translating compelling science into a story-driven content is to not tell a story specifically about the scientific proof or a particular science, but rather to use that scientific proof or discovery as either a character's intention or obstacle. A good example of this is the really recent, really excellent movie Hidden Figures, Oscar-nominated movie Hidden Figures. What's it about? You could say that it's a story about computing the calculus needed to fly man into space. Is that a fair assumption? You could pitch that. You could walk into any Hollywood office and pitch, this is a movie about computing the calculus needed to fly man into space. And you would never be asked back. Or you could pitch the same story as the incredible true life story of 3 female African-American mathematicians that must fight both racism and sexism as they're tasked with calculating the historic and daring launch of John Glenn into outer space. Intention and obstacle. So the story Hidden Figures uses both intention and obstacle. Intention and as science is both an intention and solution to overcoming the obstacles in the way of our 3 extraordinary heroines in that movie.
One of the things that we encourage content creators to do as well is the story doesn't have to be about science. I mean, that's just a job. And we're always looking at fighting stereotypes. So you have, when it's one of the things we found in the study that Ginger was talking about, we looked at 1,000 characters over film, TV, STEM characters, female STEM characters over film and TV, is that they had no family or no life outside of their job. Well, that's not true. I have friends who are scientists. They're doing stuff all the time. That's fun. And so even it's just, a character is a scientist, and that's just one part of who they are. So making these more sort of fully dimensional human beings.
That's a really important point. One of the hypotheses about why girls are so vulnerable to leaving science in their early teens is that as they're becoming women or thinking about becoming women, they look at all the things that they think of as identifying with women, like having children or having boyfriends and husbands or running marathons or whatever it may be, and they don't see scientists doing those things. And so they think it's a choice between being a woman and a scientist, which is just a false dichotomy, but you're right, it's presented that way. Other comments on the creative process?
Yeah, I'm interested in what you're talking about with an intention and obstacle. And, I guess I believe that the science becomes more compelling when we can find the human in it, right? And when we can understand the implications for our lives, the implications for our livelihoods. And so, one of the things that I'm always asking is, where is the body in this situation? And so, we can most often recognize what a body is going through. If a body if there is an obstacle that a body is pushing against, if a body has intention and is purposeful and direct and driven. And so, we go at this in a way that we're looking for, like, what's the shape of a spine? What can that tell us about the way that a person experiences this particular situation? And then also, working with multiple bodies in space in terms of like proximity and distances and that relation. And so, right, that's how we kind of navigate these stories, because, essentially, I don't always like to think that choreography, my dances are stories. Sometimes they're more sort of abstract and formal than that. But I think that audiences are always making meaning. They always want to try to understand something about what they're seeing. They don't want it to just be about line and form and texture. They want to assign more meaning to it. And so that's what we're trying to do.
Go ahead.
How important is metaphor in the context, particularly in dance, for example? Development of the character. In literature, it's certainly metaphor is certainly important. Molecular level, metaphorical understanding of that helps.
Sorry.
When I write, I'm constantly aware of metaphor and trying to create visual metaphors. I think oftentimes the story that you're writing is a metaphor for something larger, some bigger idea that you're trying to get across. So I mean, that's kind of currency for a screenwriter as well.
I think that the way that I've approached metaphor most sort of obviously is through like objects and props. Another scene in Exit Disclaimer, they're using spatulas to there's a climate denier who is providing all of these factoids about the cold winter and he starts to stick to the floor, and so the whole team comes out with spatulas and tries to kind of pry him off, and then it becomes this sort of absurdist kind of thing. But he's frying. He's baking on the surface of the hot earth. So that's a metaphor.
Well, and even when you talk about the challenges of women in sciences, whether the challenge of raising a family versus pursuing the career in science, to me as a writer, at a real basic level, there is an obstacle right there that is ripe for mining from a dramatic storytelling point of view. And I mean, on the most basic level, a character oftentimes has to overcome his or her biggest fear. And to me, as a writer, I think that's huge amount of territory to be able to mine and to explore. So I think even the most basic challenges that you're talking about opens itself up to really compelling storytelling.
So how do we know if we've been successful? What do we use as our metrics to assess change? Or, no, I'm asking.
Well, it'd be a good question for the audience, actually.
Okay. Anybody? How do we know if we've been successful? What are our metrics?
Persistence.
Laura's turning on that microphone. I'm going to quickly chime in a little bit. Part of it is building. How is this being used outside of what they're seeing or experiencing within that moment? The idea of what we're doing, we're building informal activities, working with the schools for the mural so that there's more use than just walking by and seeing it every day. Another part, though, is some of it is just going to take time of collecting data over years. Because some of it's going to be when you go and ask, why did you become a scientist? And 15 years, 10, 20 years from now, I'm saying it was because of this character and these experiences I had, which is rewarding and amazing and why we're doing this work, but it's for the long haul until you get the data.
Yeah, and that's what I was going to say. We would love to do a longitudinal study on the impact of media, but we haven't been able to get enough money for that yet. But like a small thing we did was Gina, like she doesn't do enough already, was a finalist a finalist in the Olympic archery team in her 40s. So that's who you want to work with every day. But so she has an interest in archery. So her archery coach called her a couple years ago and said, you know, it's very interesting. Used to always be, in terms of archery, it was in terms of the people who went and were part of their association, it was boys, men, women, girls. So all of a sudden, there's a whole lot of girls who are showing up here. So we test our impact primarily on this stuff via surveys right now. But so we did a survey with the people who are part of this archery association. And since 2012, do you guys know what happened in 2012? Hunger Games and Brave both came out in 2012. So following that, there was a 50% increase in the number of girls who were taking up archery. Wow.
There's also statistical evidence to back that up in the Nielsen ratings. When the Summer Olympics after those two movies came out, NBC experienced a huge surge in the Nielsen ratings of the coverage of archery, and they call it the archery effect. They experienced NBC discovered the exact same thing with curling, the sport of curling, when they started broadcasting women's curling, and the ratings were very unexpected, but they consistently have gone up for both of those sports during Olympic cycles. So on a practical level for the entertainment industry, it's real easy to quantify things like this through box office returns, Nielsen ratings, that kind of thing. And this goes to a question I know you're going to ask, but everything is often quantified and decisions are made in entertainment based on box office and the kind of revenue it brings in. So the more success you have with movies like Hidden Figures that garner Oscar attention, the old rule of thumb in Hollywood was that a woman couldn't open a movie, and that you couldn't have feature films with women protagonists. Well, that myth has been shattered in the last couple of years, and the entertainment industry is extremely conservative. It's one of the more conservative industries in our country, surprisingly, and it doesn't change doesn't happen unless there's box office or any kind of statistical information to change people's perceptions.
Wonder if you can explain how you become the first one without that precedent. So I was talking with the writer of The Man Who Knew Infinity, which is a film about the great mathematician Ramanujan, and he said it took him 10 years to get backing for that film.
That's pretty standard. I can speak from personal experience with that.
Right.
It's painfully realistic. Change usually happens around the edges in Hollywood, unless there's something cataclysmic that happens. And what often happens is the industry is really, it's like if you were to use a metaphor, a bow tie is a good metaphor for the entertainment industry. And you've got Hollywood studio, big budget studio films, you have low budget independently financed films. And if you imagine the shape of a bow tie, the two most profitable segments of the film industry are the really big summer blockbuster tentpole films that you read about in the paper, but also the really small, tiny little independently financed films. And they don't make a lot of noise because they don't generate the box office that a big film, a big studio tentpole will generate, but they often generate bigger, they're usually more profitable than the big studio film. So within the industry, the way to get attention for a particular story or genre is usually from the outside. It usually starts with small independent filmmakers. And if you have a film that is is of a genre or features a story that isn't kind of stereotypical, and it does well at the box office, then everyone else wants to glom on. So then all of a sudden you can kind of create momentum with a particular subject matter that way. And you're seeing that a lot more often with women starring leading roles, with women superheroes, with scientists being featured, with minorities being featured.
And we did a benchmark study. It's on our website, cjane.org, over the last 10 years. And we always tie box office to our data because 100% what you said, there has to be, bottom line, this is a business. And for the last 3 years, films with a female lead or co-lead have made more money than films with men. Also, films with a person of color as a lead or co-lead have made more money. And we're constantly looking at ways to measure the impact of diversity on the bottom line. So we're doing all kinds of things with Nielsen and trying to figure out, they're a big partners of ours, to try to figure out how can we draw a direct line between diverse characters and your audience. And so it's something that's very important to us, but it's very hard.
Just as a reference point, I was reading, besides trying to remember who wrote this, but they were making the argument that the success of the women's soccer in the United States is attributable to Title IX, where all of a sudden women were given access to resources to be able to, and now they're the dominant team in the world, and men's soccer is nowhere close.
Right.
So yeah. sort of interesting as a reference point. So how can we make the same impact?
Diversity, I can talk about it all day. Women in science, I don't know. I actually want to talk to you. I have some ideas after hearing your presentation on how we can do that. But yeah, it's difficult.
I saw a question over here. Yes.
This is in reference to how to measure success. And I think follow-up discussion from a performance or witnessing and art viewing is one of the ways to measure success. And this is just, I'm not sure how to increase that, but especially for something like a dance performance, which is relatively ephemeral, temporary, if we could have some sort, if we could develop more venues for follow-up discussions, I think that would be super.
Can I speak to that? I love the panel discussion, and the Seldom's works sit really beautifully within a university setting like this, because there's often, a lot of people that can come in and create these rich panel discussions. And then I'm also trying to figure out, like, how do we move beyond that? Because I just am very concerned that I'm going to push this book off. No, I'm very concerned that we're just kind of reaching the same people, and how do we move beyond that? And so, maybe when we premiere Flow, we're doing it at the Art Institute in Chicago on Earth Day 2020, the 50th anniversary of Earth Day. I'm looking to work with a youth chapter, a youth sunrise chapter in Chicago, to maybe, come out. We're working with these big inflatable set pieces. Maybe we'll take the inflatable iceberg out, in front of the Art Institute. I don't know, I'm working with a large behemoth institution too, so that moves a little slowly. But yeah, I just want it to be more visible. And then also, like, for it to be broad, and then also, find the depth of the discussion that you're talking about.
I spoke about the group intelligence piece that we did, the flash mob, and that was the inside of a local theater group, Out of Hand Theater in Atlanta, that came up with that idea. And the lovely thing about a flash mob is it can emerge anywhere, right? In the middle of a city park, in any neighborhood. So you can do it in lots of different places. So that's a way of sort of reaching a different audience, because I think that's a real challenge.
Mm-hmm.
Most of the things that we do are preaching to the choir a bit.
Right.
So.
Well, one of my collaborators who was here a few weeks ago, Fahim Majid, he has this really beautiful idea that's been going around Chicago. He calls it the floating museum. And so rather than people having to move to a neighborhood, to an elite museum, the museum is moving kind of along the public transit line.
Question at the back.
Yeah, regarding measuring success, I was just thinking it's probably important to keep watching for big changes which may take many years, but it occurred to me, I think the credit may need to go to the Gina Davis Institute as well as Sandra Bullock and Gravity, that we have the only all-female spacewalk going on today.
And go ahead. Is there a comment up here? Okay.
Wow, this is bigger than I thought. So just thinking about the metrics, how do we see the success of this efforts? And I think as a person who studied media effect, the Scully effect was really fascinating. And I grew up like watching a lot of TV shows and also drama that features women scientists, and I wanted to become a scientist one day. So I did chemistry for my undergrad major, and I had a lot of female students who studied and who pursued the direction of the science. But then one thing that frustrated me was that the student body was not mirrored in the faculty body. So we had some female students, but we had just one female professor who seems a little isolated from the rest of the department. And then I think in social science field, now I'm in the social science studying media effects, we're more conscious about in our diversity and inclusion. But in STEM field, I feel they emphasize a lot about academic excellence, and sometimes diversity and inclusion seems they put like less priority about other than so it seems pretty marginally considered. So I would love to see more kind of systematic and more aggressive kind of efforts in that level, kind of like trying to mirror the diversity in student body or grad students even mirrored to the faculty level.
One of the things that's interesting is we have a big program in place with USC School of Engineering, Viterbi School of Engineering at USC. And the program is developing this tool that I was telling you about that's machine learning for entertainment content. And we've been working on this with them for like 5 years now. So now they have more girls applying to be grad students in that department because of this particular work. So just sort of, and also I need to make one correction because this is a science festival. In the video, which was pulled together very quickly, it said that 2/3 of the women in STEM did so because of Dana Scully. It was 2/3 of the women surveyed were in STEM because Dana Scully influenced them.
Thank you. It's really fascinating. I'll play the devil's advocate here, thinking from the artist's, be it a screenwriter's point of view. I think there might be an inherent assumption in our asking artists to take more responsibility for the consequences of their representation. And the follow-on effect may be that the more that society prescribes criteria for artists to work within, the quality of their work is diminished and freedom of expression is suppressed, be it for good reasons. But working from previous experience, when I inflict that or ask that on myself, my work is just less good. So I'm wondering from your perspectives.
That's something that we really think about a lot at the Gina Davis Institute because we never want to have an impact on the creative process. And it's a weird time in Hollywood right now because of Me Too and Harvey Weinstein. I mean, diversity and inclusion is being looked at in a much different, more serious way. I mean, there are now diversity and inclusion officers at studios that report to the CEO, which before it was sort of like an afterthought in human resources, and it didn't have any money, and it wasn't. So from the studio side, I mean, I think that may be an issue because it's such a big deal to them now. But from our perspective as a research institute, that's why we talk a lot about background characters, about these we don't want to change the character, but if it doesn't, like one of the things Gina recommends to content creators is like, look at your script, go through and change, a character that's not relevant from John to Jane, if it doesn't sort of matter. Or make sure you write in a script that a crowd gathers, it's 50% female and diverse. Shonda Rhimes, who has one of the most diverse category of content out there, heard Gina speak, and Gina was on Grey's Anatomy, but this was before that. She heard Gina speak about that background characters are usually 17% female. And that's kind of ridiculous. Do women not show up in background scenes? Do women not gather? No, we do, particularly in the bathroom sometimes. And so Shonda Rhimes went back and said, I need you to go look at our background characters. And she found it wasn't 17%, but it was like 25%. So, and this is somebody who diversity is huge. She's created some really amazing characters, but she just wasn't aware of it. So we try to do it and educate people in a way that's not going to detract from the actual creative process.
I'm going to jump in there too, because that's a great point, is how do you do this in a way where you're not putting more responsibility on an artist, especially depending on the funding that an artist has. There can be a lot of limitation. Also, creativity is so inherent to your surroundings and what inspires you, and for every artist it's different, also depending on the different type of field. So our goal is taking on some of that responsibility that Joe and I have been working on of how can we create programs that nurture artists and give them environments that are going to inspire them. So we're not saying you need to do X, Y, and Z. We're giving opportunities for that to spark for the artist and their creative process and how they approach their art, so they feel that it's authentic to what they want.
What we heard repeatedly in the White House was that Writers are always looking for new settings, new material, new problems, and science is one of the least tapped of those in human experience. So by simply providing exposure, I don't think we're prescribing what their stories are about. David, I think you were going to say
I
something.
was just going to ask for clarification. Why do you feel constrained and that your creativity is suppressed? Is that because of the, since I'm a scientist up here, is that because of the scientist?
I hadn't been planning to elaborate.
I just want to mention that she is a scientist, so that's interesting.
Oh gosh. Well, I did a double major in geobiochemistry and literature, creative writing. So I'm not sure if I'm either of them, to be honest. Where is the constraint? I think, given that you work in order, there's a clear analogy with emergent properties and creativity, and not really knowing, it's a bit of a black box as to how you get into that flow state that flows you to a particular place. And so a real example for me would be, I'm writing a novella right now, and I've got I started with an intention to introduce a young audience to aspects of science. And that included a diverse set of characters. And after a first draft, it was clear that some of these characters were very cliched. And I think the constraint of diversity for someone from my background was unfortunately not something, it diminished the quality of the work.
But if you had known diverse scientists firsthand, then maybe the characters wouldn't have been cliches. Just a hypothesis.
Yeah, perhaps it's a generational thing that next generation, after the work that you've been doing, this won't be a problem.
Michael?
Well, no writer writes. Well, every writer starts writing because of the purity of wanting to write. When you get into show business and the entertainment industry, no writer is ever allowed to do that. You are writing with constraints, and Ernest Hemingway has a great quote. He said, "Writing's easy. You just sit at a typewriter and bleed." And when you're dealing, because there's a financial aspect to it, and you are writing for an industry, it's show business. People forget the business part of it. The trick and the challenge is you're constantly being told to write within genre and write, and it's a formula. It is a formula. It is formulaic, and the trick is to write within genre and written a set of expectations, but to figure out a way to be subversive about it. And every good writer figures out a way to get their original message through, in spite of the fact they're constantly being told to rewrite. I think it's a big disservice to think that the screenwriter had, at least in Hollywood, in theater it's different, because in theater the playwright is held in reverence. In film, the screenwriter is the bottom of the barrel, and screenwriters made a deal with the devil back when they formed the Writers Guild, and in exchange for getting paid a lot of money up front. And it's a director's medium, and film and television is we're in a kind of a golden age. It actually is a producer-writer's medium now, but you are constantly getting notes from different powers that be to change your story, to make it more sellable and make it more marketable, and it's really frustrating. So I guess this is a really roundabout way to answer your question, is you need to figure out a way to be subversive with your writing and stick within the scope of the story that you set out to tell, and work within that genre to do that. And it gets back to just the fundamentals. If you're writing about a character, instead of writing about I have to have a diverse cast with minorities and women, and I have to have all these different set things. Instead of looking at the cast that way, write about the individual, write about the person, and about the conflicts. And if you get back to what Aaron Sorkin said about intention and obstacle, you can apply that. I mean, all writing gets down to man versus himself, man versus man, or man versus somebody, man versus nature. And again,
or woman.
Or woman. Woman, thank you. But that's, but, so that, yeah.
On that word, it's, okay, if people need to leave, it's past 3:30, and what we had planned was 2 more questions, and then we're going to go to a smaller conversation with just part of our panel. So, another question.
So this, I guess this question was kind of inspired a little bit by what Michael had said during his intro about when he speaks with students through the kind of educational pipeline and about artists, and it decreases over time. And one of the commonalities I've seen between art and performance in science is in the educational pipeline, fear of engagement. But one thing I've noticed, at least I'm a scientist, I'm not a performer or an artist, but one thing I've noticed is that the communities around creative expression have developed some significant tools in lowering that sense of fear of getting people to engage in that medium in spite of setbacks or failures or criticism that sometimes I think is absent in the scientific fields, that failure is punished and success is rewarded. So I guess the question for the panel is, what can the scientific educational pipeline learn from the artistic communities about how to foster and reduce the fear of engagement?
I kind of disagree with that observation a little bit, in that why do you pursue a particular field? I mean, I think artists excel at what they do. They follow it because they tap into their passion, and they become passionate about it. I mean, if you're trying to tell a story and it takes 10 years to raise money to do that, and everyone's telling you no, that's oftentimes the only thing you have at your disposal is your passion and your conviction.
That happens in science too.
Exactly. That's my point. I think when you hear these stories of discovery in the science community, oftentimes it's people that are told no, 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 and they have figured out, just like an artist, they have put dots, they've connected dots that nobody else did. And to me, I'm in awe of the passion that it takes to be able to do that.
Also, experiments usually fail. That's a little known fact that we're always trying to convince our undergraduates and graduate students of, because they think that they are a failure when their experiments fail. But if we knew all the answers, we wouldn't need to do experiments.
And so much more from the failures than you do from the successes. Yeah.
And I just want to follow up, because I think you were talking specifically though about kids and in a younger age level. Right. And at a certain age, that one failure and that one discouragement is huge for a lot of kids. And so it's like, what can you do, I think, is where you were going. I mean, I understand where you were answering, but I think it wasn't the same question.
Yeah, a little bit. I think it was more about the kind of the influence of the support structures at the earlier ages, that kind of perception of being involved in theater in school and being involved in choir or band or orchestra or any sort of performance arts or dance has a different level of connotation and support associated with it than trying to be involved in science-based or STEM-based fields. And I know that's changing, but I guess it was basically, how can those communities for students in kind of K through 12, what can the science-based communities learn to better support and encourage student engagement in the face of the fact that it's not always going to work. You are going to experience failures, you are going to experience setbacks, and how to kind of tap into that inner passion that may exist.
But Michael's example of kids not raising their hand to be artists is the same. They're suppressed also.
I think there's a couple of things that was pinging for me in your conversation, and a couple of things that maybe Joe can talk about as well. But one thing that you find with arts is that there's a higher level of storytelling, and storytelling is a way of learning from others' failures, so that when you do, you feel a little bit more empowered, like, okay, this is normal, this is okay, this is maybe a good thing, because you're learning something new. So there are different ways of how arts can help with informing how we're communicating science. So this comes to the part of the researchers, if you're in a university setting when you're teaching as well, how are you teaching your science to be more inclusive? How are you telling the story of science to be more inclusive of students in the room? Also inspiring through story when you do have failures, how are you approaching them? I think there is value. David, you mentioned that there was a course that was done where they're bringing fields together, which I think is fantastic. And I had a similar experience when I was going to high school, where they merged our English and history, and they would bring in the sciences and the math to talk about, we're going to be talking about these time frames. We want to read literature about it. We want to teach you the history of how this was discovered. And having all of those interconnections and seeing how much they interrelate, I think had a powerful impact, along with my grandmother's storytelling and how I was raised with a First Nation kind of perspective, and how I approached my science and how I then started to succeed when I used those tools. And Joe, I was thinking a little bit of the discovery course, the illuminating discovery course, being a part of using the arts as a way to look at visualizing the science and talking about science.
Yeah, another initiative we have here at the Wisconsin Institute for Discovery is a course called Illuminating Discovery, which teaches communication in a very broad way, communication for scientists, other scientists in their fields, communication to the public, and then an area that I find particularly ignored among scientists, communication with scientists outside your own field, which is one of the bases for interdisciplinary work. If you can't talk to somebody in another discipline, then it's very hard to collaborate with them. So, and one of the key underlying currents of that course is the use of storytelling. So I think that fusion is really important, and we do have a lot to learn from each other.
I just to follow up on that, I think part of the problem is systemic in institutions, in colleges and high schools. And I think, one of the big inspirations in my life when I was young was actually Carl Sagan. And I think he tapped into something because he was also a poet. He was an astronomer, but he was also a poet. And I think so often it's so difficult at the collegiate level, and Carrie, you mentioned this, with disciplines being siloed, that you don't get any cross-pollination. And I think it would be wonderful for scientists to take more arts classes, to be able to speak in poetic terms and in metaphor just as easily as they can to their colleagues, because I think they'll find that they can express their ideas in a way that is very instinctive, and that common people, non-scientific people, can speak. And this kind of gets into also, one of the things that's frustrating as a creative, the entertainment industry, we're often criticized because, the state of, why is there another Rambo movie starring a 73-year-old Sylvester Stallone? And, part of the problem is that a lot of the decisions are made by executives that don't have any background in the arts. One of the things that's taught, they all have MBAs from business school. Is there anybody here from the business school? Nobody's here. Oh, one person from the business school. One of the things that's often taught, I think one of the foundations of business, you're taught to minimize or eliminate risk. And as a scientist and as an artist, risk is a cornerstone of what you do. And there's this natural tension between between that. And I think, and the currency is very different. Artists and scientists are in the currency of sharing and giving things away, and learning and gaining value through ideas by giving them away. Whereas we live in a society that's market-driven and an industry that's market-driven. So I think, if we can eliminate those silos or cross-pollinate between those silos, that would help at a real.
Well, can I mention that? So I'm the artist in residence here with the Division of the Arts, and the course that I had imagined was that it would be that cross-pollination. I was wanting to open up this course to people from engineering or people from environmental science or business school or wherever, to come into the room with a lot of different makers and to embody their research. And so inviting people that, yes, maybe had some physical training, and then people who are just sort of courageous, right, and uninhibited. And not that I'm going to teach them to dance, but to, in some way, physicalize what it is that they're doing in their laboratory, right? And what ended up happening was, unfortunately, that, it's a great group of students. I love these students, but they do all have a performance background. They're all dance people and theater people. And I didn't get that mix that I wanted. And so then I just, I'm wondering whether that's in part because maybe departments need to require more of this sort of cross-pollination. Or maybe what we start doing, it's a financial situation too, but maybe, you start having classes that are taught by both artists and scientists, right? Co-teaching, more of that.
I just add one thing to that. Life is ambiguous. And yet, particularly at the younger ages, we teach that there's a right answer and a wrong answer. Right. You get the wrong answer, then you're somehow lower than person. And yet, we weigh particle duality. It depends on how you look at it. How you observe it as to whether it's a wave or a particle. So we deal with this ambiguity at all levels, but we don't do a good job of teaching it. So I think that may be what you're getting at least at the younger level. I think we're getting better at this. I think we're getting better at this because the information is now more available than it's ever been before. So now it's about choosing the information that's relevant to the argument you're trying to make and not having someone give you the right answer or mark your paper that it's right or wrong. So I think we're getting better at it. But I think historically that's been a difference between the arts and the sciences.
I'm going to turn it over to Laura or Ginger. Ginger, okay, for continuing the conversation, but I want to thank our entire panel. Thank you so much for great conversation.